After e6, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, we have the Rossolimo, and after queen b6, as seen in the previous video, we need to go bishop a4. So we're still looking at this g6 idea, but in this case, after c3, black will not play bishop g7, but rather play knight f6. So instead of going through the usual bishop g7 and castle and d4 with black playing d5 as well, we're gonna play this other move, knight f6 immediately, just so we understand the pattern. After knight f6, white immediately attacks the knight, and this knight can't take the pawn because it's defended. The knight will have to move. So after the natural knight d5, white castles, and after bishop to g7, everything looks kind of normal, but white now plays d4, and we have built this chain of pawns from b2 to e5. So what can black do? Black will have to challenge the strength and control over the central square by white's pawns. So obviously the move here is going to be c takes d4 is the typical move. That's the whole point of playing Sicilian pawn. 99% of the time the Sicilian c5 pawn will take in d4. What happens if black challenges the center like that with d6? Right? This seems to be making sense, because then the black player hopes of an exchange, and then the rook can come to an open file. This is also allowing the bishop to develop. But after d6, white continues with c4, and then the knight will have to move. And after the knight moves from the square d5, let's say knight c7, d5 is accessible with the pawn, and the knight in c6 is pinned. So that's not possible. So after white plays d4, c takes d4. Now white continues with the most accurate move, bishop b3, immediately targeting the knight. We don't need to recapture back because we're just placing the bishop into this lovely diagonal, attacking the knight. The knight will be forced away from that square and will no longer be able to be in a central square. So black's only move is knight to c7. What happens if black tries some sort of swap a piece for pawns? So for example, pawn takes. The idea is that if the bishop takes the knight, so like this, then the pawn can go to b2, and this is huge trouble now because the pawn in b2 is defended by the queen, and so we're in huge trouble. So after pawn takes in c3, we have to take the knight with the queen, and if black plays e6, simply queen to d1, and we're just winning. So no reason to panic about such a move. So after bishop to b3, attacking the knight, let's have a look at this move, e6. Now white plays something very similar to the setup of the previous video, knight to a3. So you see how the two variations are very relatable, of course, because it's the same setup. Knight to a3. Now the pawn cannot take in c3 due to the double attack of the pawn and the knight. Just to make an example, because knight c4 is just too strong, it wins the game, right? The knight will land in d6 after attacking the queen, and it's going to be amazing for white. So let's make an example. If pawn takes, knight attacks the queen, and queen to d8, knight check, king f8. How do we exploit this situation? Bishop takes knight, break the pawn structure of our opponent, and now we take back. The reason is, although it looks very tempting to just play queen to d5 here, but of course queen e7 just blocks everything. No, the best move is to take the pawn, also because that will allow two possibilities of the bishop to develop, either a3 or h6. So this move here makes this bishop in c1 stronger. So bishop a3 is a huge threat. What happens if black tries to remove the support of this incredibly strong knight by taking the pawn in e5? Then white continues with rook to e1, and that's game over, because we have two pieces attacking e5. Besides, we have the infiltration of the rook. It's deadly. What happens if the pawn is taken by the bishop? Bishop to e5. This may allow the king some sort of escape and development of the rook, maybe to g8 or e8 as well, after the black player is done dealing with his knight. Now white takes bishop, and then knight takes back, and now bishop h6 comes with check. If the king goes to g8, then rook e1 wins again, once again exploiting this incredible file. And if the king goes to e7 instead, then queen d5, and it's desperate for black. Back at this position, we're attacking the knight. We're still looking at the move e6 to protect the knight. So knight a3, as we said, And of course, taking this pawn is wrong. So after castling, looks like a very normal move. White continues with knight to c4. So let's have a look at a slightly different setup, like queen to a6. This allows the black player to not suffocate the bishop in c8 and potentially push the pawn in b5. So after queen to a6, best move now is to take the pawn back in d4. We have this lovely center. And after b5, which is the best move according to the engine, white continues with the knight excellently placed in d6. So how to deal with a move like f6? For example, in these situations, the black player will have to do something about this really strong center. White continues with taking the knight. Pawn takes back with breaking the pawn structure. And now we can take the pawn in f6. The white pieces enjoy more freedom than the black pieces, so we're interested in the opening of the lines. Now here, the rook cannot take in f6 because of this lovely knight e8 move, attacking the rook and the square of c7, which is forking these two major pieces. So the knight will win something, a lot of material basically. So after the white pawn is taken with the bishop, white continues with bishop h6, and now black continues with best move bishop to g7. Black cannot play rook to d8 because of queen to b3, and it's going to be very difficult to protect the pawn in d5. And if the knight moves to e7 to protect the pawn, that this is still going to be a fork attacking the king and the rook as soon as the knight is gone. So white in this position has a threat of playing rook e1, and it's perfectly fine to give the rook for this knight. This knight will be stuck in this square because of this massive threat. And in case of ideas like bishop to b7, it's perfectly fine to play knight to b5, winning more material. So in this position, best move is bishop back to g7. And now we take the bishop, king takes back. Obviously, typical move in such situations because you're taking a valid defender of the squares around the opponent king. Rook to e1 now. And the idea of the white player is to play knight e8 here. So the rook in e1 is protecting e8 square so that the knight can threaten to go to c7. Best move by black is queen to b6 according to the engine, but white continues with the plan queen to b3 exploiting this double pawn. So let's make a quick recap. So after knight c6, bishop e5, queen b6, bishop a4, and then g6, c3, knight f6 is met by e5 and knight d5, and now castle, bishop g7, d4. After pawn takes, we play bishop to b3 and knight to c7. White takes the pawn. And now, black castles is met by bishop e3. And right now the white player is threatening d5. So best move is queen to a5 to get out of trouble, because d5 comes with an attack on the knight and the bishop comes with an attack on the queen. What happens after a move like queen e3? White still continues with knight to d2. After a move like b6, h4, bishop to b7, h5. So in this position, black's best move is knight to d8. We will also go through moves like d6 in the next video, but black's best now is knight to d8. The idea is also to escape the powerful d5 and the idea of rook to c1, which is going to be annoying for the two knights since it's pinning the knight in c6. Besides, the black knight has no access anywhere in case he were to go and get too close to the white's territory. The knight will be kind of trapped. He won't be able to go anywhere else, and it doesn't have any prospect of capturing anything right now. So black's suggested move is to go to e6 and also to reduce the influence of this incredible bishop. And it's also necessary for the black rook that goes to c8 to become effective as soon as possible. h6, bishop goes back to h8, and now white continues to bishop to g5, attacking the pawn, provoking a weakness, which is basically either black pushes this pawn, which is silly because it surrenders the control of the dark squares to the light square white bishop, and then the black bishop in h8 doesn't get to play. And also while it's attacking the pawn, so knight e6 cannot be played immediately. So this makes black play rook e8, and white continues with knight to c4. So the queen will be forced to a6. White continues with bishop to h4 in order to allow the g5 square available for the knight. And after finally black plays knight to e6, white continues with knight to e3. The goal here is to play d5. closing up any opportunity of the black player pieces to be effective. So d5 is just too much a threat. After black playing d5, which is the best move for black, white continues with rook to c1, and after rook to c8, it looks like the game is kind of normal, but black has a few pieces that have been placed inactive, like this queen, this bishop in b7, and the bishop in h8. They're not as effective as white's pieces. White now continues with knight to g5 and looks for swaps. Best move by black, according to the engine, is b5 to allow the queen a little bit more freedom. And now white continues with taking the knight in e6. It's not advisable for the queen to take this knight though, because white is threatening a development of queen to d2 and move like f4, f5 coming soon, and that will be crashing to the king side. However, black's best option is knight takes in e6, which allows a swap of rooks. The rook can't take back in c8 because the bishop will be winning a crucial pawn in e7. So after bishop takes back, white continues with taking the pawn in d5, and after black's best move, queen to b7, white plays f4 with the goal of eventually playing f5.